So we're talking about the Gamakas and how they handle the ragas, even Kalyani, Hamir Kalyani or Yamuna Kalyani. Every Gamaka that they sang was completely in proportion. I don't know if we can translate this word alavu in Tamil into proportion, but the alavu of every Gamaka that they sang, every swara that was sung in an alapna or in a kirtanam or in any manodharma, for example. The alavu, for the nishadam that I was talking about before in Enduku Nirdaya, the alavu of that nishadam in Enduku Nirdaya is the beauty of her music, of the understanding of that raga that she had. And this awareness of a certain value and proportion in not only the gamaka but also in just presentation of a certain musical offering was something very special in her music.
Yeah, and we see this proportion in her Neraval singing also, right? A lot of us like to think of the Neraval as an extension of the line or a musical expansion or the musical idea of a given line. But does it always remain within that scope is something very interesting to think of. Like for example, I've often wondered if suppose there is a line that is purely on say the Rishabha in the lower octave. Does it then make sense for us to expand on the meaning of that line but in multiple different columns and multiple different octaves? I still do it, but I don't have a specific answer to it. But if you take a line like Shatadriti Pujita, for example, it revolves around that Rishabha in that octave. So is it more apt if we stick to exploring that line around that region, or are we allowed to take the liberty because it's our expression of that line? I think that the balance is somewhere in between, as long as we don't get carried away. But I think it's a very interesting thing to look at from the lens of proportion that we are going to speak about in this first point when we speak about Brinda's Neraval. Because if you take examples of her singing Neraval for, I think, Badari Vanamula in Shankarabharanam, or even let's say Kannatalli Gada in Ninne Nammi Nanu. Again, Kannatalli Gada is a very unnatural line in today's because we automatically go to Kamakshi because it's brighter, it works better for a concert. But I think as an idea, if we take both of these lines, both of these are in Mishra Chapu, both of these revolve around the Panchama in the way she sings the composition. If we actually listen to her Neraval, for both of these compositions, she would not have sung more than 3 or 4 rounds with the violinist. And what is interesting is that in both of these examples, the Neraval remains in the Kir column. It never switches to the male column because the line is intrinsically in a certain column. The other interesting aspect is that the Neraval also revolves around Pa in both of these cases. Even though the Shankarabharanam and the Todi Alapana that she sung before goes across the entire gamut, the Badari Vanamula remains entirely around Pa because the way she sings the line in the composition is around Panchama. Similarly for the Todi Kirtana. What is also astonishing is that when we think of Badarivanamula today or any of the other Mishra Chapu Kirtanams, you take either Pakkala Nilabadi with Manasuna or any of the other compositions that we expand on today, the idea of the tala is very present in the way we put the talam and in the way we split the words and in the way we enunciate and have pressure points in the Neraval. But what is interesting in the way she explores both of these lines, more importantly Badarivanamula, is the way she splits the words. The tala becomes almost a silent and a subtle layer on top of which the Shankaravaranam is flowing for the lyrics Badarivanamula. So every time she explores that line, what you hear is actually the words, the meaning, the way Neraval is meant to be. You don't hear Mishra Chapu, you don't hear the layer of that laya of Mishra Chapu added onto these lyrics. The Mishra Chapu remains a very silent, docile partner that just provides a basic support, on top of which the Neraval happens. But the beauty of that is that it happens around Panchama, it happens only in the Kirkala, it happens with focus on the lyric, and I think that is fascinating for us to think of, because these days we would probably sing one round there, the first round there. The second round is always already on the sa or the ga after that, because that's where we believe it has the most impact. But is that the most appropriate musical choice that we can make there? Is a question very important for us to ask when we listen to examples like this.
Another interesting aspect that I observed in this recording was there was no male column ending to a keel column Neraval. So that is pretty interesting and pretty phenomenal to maintain that throughout. Even the Neraval just before the advent of the male collar Neraval didn't have that ending to show or suggest that the next one is going to be a male collar Neraval.
Absolutely.
And the raga was predominant. I think even all their aspects of Manodharma, take be it Neraval singing or Swaram singing, I think raga was paramount. Yeah. Ragam, they saw Neraval also as raga music, and that's why you see that kind of a certain flow, even if it is rhythmic, with the raga flow in it, very intact.
So apart from the recordings that we heard, one or two of my most favorite and most memorable Neravals of hers is actually in this Todi Kirtanam Morabettide, in the Charanam line. I don't know what it is about the line, because each time I listen to it, I try to decipher it. Musically, there is something about that Todi and the phonetics of those lyrics and the way she sings them. And in fact, because that line is also loaded with far more syllables, the way she moves around within those notes and within those syllables is precious. I have goosebumps as I'm talking about it. And that remains a very special recording to me, because that shows that there is some value to retaining the integrity of the composition in the way we expand Neraval or Swaram singing. And that's where I think this whole idea of proportion comes in again. If proportionately that line demands more, that's an entirely different argument altogether. But if it's a line that is already very subtle, that cannot or does not warrant more than say 3 or 4 short explorations of Neraval around that line, then it loses proportion automatically. Beyond that point, you are then thinking of raga, you are thinking of tala, you are thinking of other things. But the fact that subtle Neraval remains my most memorable experience of her Neraval singing is only because she was driven entirely by all of these principles that drove her Manodharma singing.
దానం ఒకటి అడిగిన తపము పొగడనరజేసి దానం ఒకటి అడిగిన తపము పొగడనరజేసి దానం ఒకటి అడిగిన తపము
So from there, if we were to move into, say, swaram singing, the same proportion carries forward. In fact, her swaram singing is by far the most proportionate in terms of raga and neraval singing. The time that she takes for all of these would be around 5 or 6 minutes each. But we find that mismatch a lot. Sometimes we'll find a composition that has only a 2-minute ragam. The composition might be 10 minutes. It may be a 4-minute neraval and a 15-minute swaram section, right? So this disproportionate split of time is very rare in her recordings. If you see her swaram singing also, just like how the neraval is an extension of the melody of that line, the swaram continues to be an extension of that neraval that she is already established. Even if she moves on to the male kala neraval, even if that neraval moves into a faster kala pramanam, it would be maybe for just 2 avartanams or 3 avartanams, because then that is not entirely established in the listener's ear and her own ear as well, in such a manner by which then from there switching back into the kirkala swaram does not seem unnatural. Many of the times today when we sing a male kala neraval, you do a huge exploration, a final round of it that creates a crescendo that brings you an applause, at which point you feel like, okay, this is done. Then you start the kirkala swaram as a fresh entity almost. There, honestly speaking, the two don't have a connection, but in the way she sings, there is an intrinsic connection between the two because of that proportion again. And one other beautiful aspect of her swaram singing is that for somebody so entrenched in the idea of raga music and phrases, she never sang a single phrase while singing swarams. She sang very limited karves. If suppose there was a beat that had to have 2 swarams, invariably you will find 2. There may be sometimes where she extends one note with a karve, sometimes where she cuts to just have a better impact for the ending to go back to the line, but more often than not the swaras stuck very specifically to the meter of the talam and was filled properly. She would never take a break from swara singing and sing a small phrase in between of raga, or she would never expand on the karvai of the swara with, say, a phrase or with, say, a movement or with a gamaka. It was when she was singing swara, it was very strictly swara singing. And the beauty of that is that it gives you a very different perspective and almost, in my opinion, the most rigid experience of listening to Brinda. Her raga is flowing, her composition is flowing, her padam javalis are flowing, neraval is flowing, but the place where you see that strictness in presentation of manodharma is in swara singing.
sari da ma gari sa sari da ma ga da ma gari da sari padamba.
So just in terms of the kid column, even when she moves to the male column in swara singing, she maintains the 4-note per beat alavu, and there are very few karves within that, so it almost sounds like a continuous sarvalagu swaram singing experience where there are no breaks in between. The break would happen only when the line comes. So I think that's a very interesting aspect of her swaram singing, because for somebody like her, she could have very easily taken that liberty to, I think, explore more of the raga within the swara. But the fact that she kept the swara singing very rigid and disciplined to what the swara should be, what the idea of the kalpana swara should be, is, I think, a great example for us to, I think, emulate. And when we speak of swara singing, when we speak of kirkala singing, one other thing that we do in today's context is, when we go back to songs like Brova Samayamide or songs like Paridana Minchite, we always use that in the context of a filler, so it's always faster. So it always helps us when we are singing male kala swarams to that. So invariably you sing the composition where by now even the percussion artist knows that he needs to play a male kalam over it to offer a certain effect, where at which point singing male kalam seems natural to us today. But from the way she sings the composition and from the way her percussion accompanies the composition, most of these compositions you will always find her singing kirkalam, whether it's Samaja Varagamana, whether it is Brova Samaya, whether it is Paridana Michite. We have so many options like that, so many examples like that. The fact that kirkala swaram is being explored in compositions like that seem unnatural to us today, offer an entirely new window into that. Even if you take Paripurna Kama, Saketa, for example, in today's context will be a second song or a sub-main third song, where automatically after using a male kala neraval, sa ri ga ma sa aketa makes sense. But ri ga ma sa aketa is invariably what she would always sing, which would then offer, I think, a very different, I think, palette of swara singing, and I think a different launching point for even the male kala swarams after that. Because when you move into the male kalam from existing kirkala swarams that you are singing, I think the way or the turn that the male kala swaram singing takes is also much more nuanced. I think pushes you in a different direction and makes you try something different. And I think that possibility is great for us to explore, because now I'm thinking of how, if suppose say we were singing Manavyala Kinchara or Brova Barama, for example, how maybe a few kirkala swarams for them would sound before we actually launch into the male kala swarams that we sing today. And I think that offers a very different possibility or a small window into something that we can do that's a little offbeat with the known. And I think for her to have done that naturally, and us considering that offbeat today, says a lot about our values of what we believe music should be.
Pamagari sari gama pama samaya nida pamagari sani sari gama pama samaya dani padani da pama pada pama da papa maga pama dani sani sari gama pama samaya. Ni sari gari ri sani gari ri sani ri sada ni pa dari sari gari gari ri sani gari ga sari ri sani sada ni ma pa dari sani da pa ma pa ma gari sari ga ma ma ma.
So just like the example that we heard now, her proportion between kirkalam and male kalam singing is very unique. More often than not, irrespective of who the artist is, you pick a cross section of their concerts and listen to it, you will find that the duration of them singing Melkala Swarams is far more in a concert than Kirkala Swarams. Brinda Mass is just the opposite, which I think is very interesting to look at. That also I think spoke about the general Kala Pramanam of her singing and what she thought represented her musical values. When we are speaking of this, I also want to just quickly speak about a couple more examples. The way she sings the Begada Swarams for Tyagaraja Namaste, and the way she sings Swarams and Paras for Neelayatakshi at Gana Lole, and the way she sings Shankarabharanam Swaram for Shri Dakshinamurte. The beauty with these three pieces is all three of these are in talas that are not common. Rupaka talam, yes, is fairly common, but the Tishra Tripute or the Mishra Jampa are not common. And even in terms of the composition is layered within the raga in a certain way. And the way she maintains the sound of that composition and how the swaras continue to be an extension of that sound, of that particular paras in Neelayatakshi and not the paras that she sings in Smarasundaranguni or somewhere else, is I think of great value and I think is of great nuance. Similarly, we also spoke about the Samaja Varagamana in the beginning. The swaras in Samaja Varagamana are also very interesting because then you hear both kalas there with the big da. It's a very disorienting but a very interesting listening experience. So we'll also play a little bit of that for you. Before we move on to the next session, the final recording that you'll be seeing is one of the rare videos that we have of her singing Swaram. And given by what we said in the beginning, she doesn't sing too many karves while singing Swaram. But in this particular example of singing Swarams for Meru Samana and Maya Malagaula, there is one instance where after a few exchanges of singing Kirkala Swaram, she just sings one pa. And that one pa is an experience. I'm not going to say much about it. I'm not going to try and decode it. We'll just listen to that. Now we move into the Padam and Javali section, and I think Brindama is probably the only artist in this entire Explore series where we would have a dedicated section to just speak about Padams and Javalis, which speaks about her expertise over them. Just speaking a little about where she learnt them from, most of what she learnt from is believed to be from Veena Dhanammal and of course Lakshmi Ratnam as well, but her initial training happened under Kanchipuram Nayana Pillai, and from whom she learned most of these Padams and Javalis are there for all of us to learn. But what is interesting is whom Veena Dhanammal learnt these from. The story, as Brindama says in her video, is that she learns it from a blind musician who plays the veena standing upright, whose name is Gopal Das. Is a very interesting story because there is no other reference to this particular musician or artist in any other treatise, but the fact that he had this treasure of Padams and Javalis with him that were passed down to Veena Dhanammal and that has permeated this sound of Carnatic music today is very, very interesting for us to think of, because good music can be absolutely anywhere. How we take it and how we make it our own and how we value it and continue to treasure it is, I think, where the magic is, which I think Veena Dhanammal did with great ferociousness. In fact, the fact that she held them so preciously and with the great amount of care that she passed it down to her daughters and to her entire family. So the fact that these Padams and Javalis are at the forefront and are at the center of this understanding of their family's musical history and treasure is, I think, is very important to establish and acknowledge at this point.
Thank you.
the music that this form, the way they sing it, offers to the entire gamut of Carnatic music is something very special, and it has permeated through every aspect of music and influenced, I think, every artist who is singing Carnatic music today. That nuance that we speak about in their music is also brought out in these compositions that they have made their own. Every padam and javali that I have heard till now has had this very, very minute movement, nuance of gamakas, of swaras, of the raga itself, unique phrases, phraseologies. When you look at Moratopu, for example, in Sahana, it's one of the padams that she has immortalized, and there are so many phrases in that Sahana that actually bring out a flavor of the raga that one does not hear nowadays in other kirtanas or in other explorations of that raga. For example, just the that entire phrase, the usage of that phrase in Sahana, and just as an experiment, I've tried practicing with that phrase and trying to explore that phrase in Sahana and trying to get some context, and it just opens up another direction for somebody who's looking to learn and explore that raga. So when you listen to Moratopu, and of course, I mean, there's so many aspects. The entire start of Miraga, that padam, it starts with Sahana in the Mandrasthai, the Sajam, the Adar Sajam, and the next second it goes to the Rishabam. So to imagine a Sahana that goes from the Sajam down over there in the lower octave to the Rishabam in the Tarasthai is a phenomenal. It's just a phenomenon in music, in Sahana, and to have that kind of a composition handed down to us by somebody like Brinda from the Dhanama family, and to execute that vision of the composition of Moratopu, starting like that, going into different phrases, and actually holding that integrity through every rendition, through every passing on to any other student, is something phenomenal. There are so many padams that we can talk about like that. Rama Rama Pranasakhi. There is at least from my point of view, the lesser known Kontegadu in Surati than in Dendu. All these padam Payyada that she has handled in a very, very beautiful manner. When you also look at javalis that she has handled, javalis are a little more, you can say, smaller compositions than the padams. The integrity with which these compositions are handled, the complexity with which every movement is handled in these compositions, also exactly the same as which she has handled a big composition or a padam or any other major composition. So there is no callousness in the way she's handled different compositions, especially javalis, in ragas like kamas in Kedarakola, Bhairavi, So these kind of ragas used in javalis, the way she's handled them, Yelarada and Ekamini comes to mind over here, and Yeratagurnatara in Kedarakola comes to mind. So the beautiful ways in which they handle these compositions is a learning just listening to these compositions. And the most important part is, for me at least, there is no raga that precedes or alapana that precedes these compositions, or swaram or manodharma that has been done in these compositions. They have been rendered by her as it is. So it's very interesting because these compositions are themselves big treasure troves of phrases and phraseology. I don't know why this was done, that there's no exploration of the raga in that composition was done before that composition is, I don't know, at least for me right now, is pretty tempting. It's very tempting to take up a small part of the phraseology and just, explore it and then get into the padam maybe or the javali. Yeah. But that has not been done by her.
I have a thought for that. I feel like the reason that they didn't consciously do it for that is because the way we look at padam javalis are as a special classified section, as something that we need extra expertise to practice and make a conscious effort towards. But for them, that was like breathing, that was part of their way of life. So for them, it's interesting that the phrases and the nuances of the padams and the javalis permeated into everything else they sang. Yes, but for us, it would be the reverse, where we are okay singing everything else, so we have to bring aspects of that to be able to achieve a certain level of, proficiency in being able to sing a padam and a javali. So for, I think, somebody like her, having to sing a certain raga before Rama Rama Prana Sakhi in that Bhairavi was no different from singing a Bhairavi before Chintai Makanda, because aspects of this idea of Bhairavi from Rama Rama Prana Sakhi was already with her, that she already used in other manodharma explorations. So in my opinion, I feel like, which is why when they sing a padam or a javali in a concert, it never feels like an addition or like a small patch in. Right now, if you sing a concert in an entirely different aesthetic structure and you suddenly sing a padam or a javali in between, you can clearly tell that that's something that is there that isn't part of the overall aesthetic structure of that artist. But the fact that whatever they sang, whether it was a Tyagaraja Kirtana, Ragam, Niraval, Swaram, any other composition, something in Kurunji late at the end, the fact that everything belonged to one aesthetic structure means that the superior aesthetic idea of the padams and the javalis were something that they drew from to also sing all of these other things, which I think is a very interesting thing, which is why I probably also feel like they didn't see the need to necessarily explore Manodharma in Padams and Javalis. They may have also believed that the Padams and the Javalis need not be explored in that manner. That is a very different question altogether. But I would like to believe that that is probably.
I wonder if somebody has asked them these. Asked her these questions.
Knowing her, I don't think many people would have probably had the guts to go and ask her that.
Another interesting thing that Padams and Javalis, she always sings it at the end of a concert per se. And while we may say it's such a beautiful composition, replete with phraseology and raga, why is it relegated to the end of the concert, or for lack of a better term, relegated to the end of the concert? That's a question that we may ask, but we hear her say in one of the talks on music that she has talked about. She says that singing the padam with all its nuance and all its glory,
with that clarity.
With that clarity, requires the voice to be malleable, and for the voice to be malleable, it should have been worked for a certain period of time. If the voice is not worked for a certain period of time, the malleability of the voice has not set in, and because of that, the padam won't sound the way it should in all its clarity and with all its nuance. So she actually says that, and
that is an interesting belief though. But then when you look at, say, padams like Yalapadare, for example, to be able to hit that Sani Dapa Sasaga right in the beginning, in that Shruti Shuddham, if somebody attempted to do that in the beginning of a concert where the screens have just opened out and the first thing you want to sing is that, the amount of vocal proficiency and confidence you'd need to be able to do something like that is unimaginable. But at the same time, if suppose somebody feels that their voice after having sung for an hour and a half is at a better position to be able to hit those notes and explore that nuance with the necessary modulations better, then I think that's each one to themselves. And I think that that's very important to know, because ultimately in both these situations, what stands at the forefront is the integrity of the composition and wanting to present that Begada in all its glory, which I think is important.
Yeah, the awareness that you have whether one can or cannot present that composition in its entire intent.
Yeah, absolutely. If we were to look at the same composition we just heard, Yalapadare for example, every time I've heard the composition till today, the Anupallavi and the Pallavi you can see some sort of an idea, some sort of a musical movement that we can make sense of as a learning exercise. But out of all the other padams that I've heard Brindama sing, the Charanam of Yalapadare is like a maze. For me, at times you don't even know when one line is over, when the next line is going on. So much so that the Begada is moving within a certain space that we are not used to first listening to Begada in around the Panchama region in that manner. Then for it to move around like that, and for then actually the only compositional form like the Varnam where the syllable of the words take a back seat for the tune is probably the Padam. Because the syllables are so spaced out, the words beyond a point you can't actually make out the words because the space is so much in between them. But because there's so much space, to fill that space with those many oscillations and ornamentations and movements means that those spaces are then replete with musical ideas. So for you to then comprehend and assimilate and receive each of these musical ideas, to see some musical graph there is that much more difficult. And for me, the most complex I've ever felt listening to a padam, trying to understand or learn it, is Yalapadare. And for her to be able to just move and negotiate that space so easily is, I think, testament to how much a part of her those compositions have become. There are a few things that we say about padam singing. One, we believe nobody will listen to it. Two, we believe that, okay, but you know, it takes so long to sing one padam. At which time we could have probably sung 2 or 3 smaller compositions. 3, we believe, okay, fine, but to do that, you know, you need great breath control. I honestly believe that all of these are excuses for us to not step into that because we are a little intimidated by it. That's the honest truth. Because as much as you require certain breath control to sing padams, I think it's highly overrated, because you need similar breath control to be able to sing Tanam, to be able to sing Neraval, Melkala, Neraval, and all of these aspects. The only thing that the padam requires that a normal composition does not is far superior understanding and internalization of each and every movement. Very simply put, if you listen to Brindama sing, at no point is she thinking of where the talam is, where does the word fall in the talam, am I in laya, have I sung the previous phrase correctly, do I have enough talam space to move into the next. None of these thoughts enter her mind at all, and that's the only way you can sing a padam this complex. Because of which, at which point, if you internalized it to that extent, you will breathe only in certain spaces. At which point, breathing only in certain spaces becomes normal, becomes the space that automatically the padam gives you. That's the only space the padam gives you to be able to take a gap, because everything else is flowing, everything else is moving. So I think that amount of practice and perfection is something that maybe we are not willing to put in today's world, because of which we still don't have enough people taking them up and making an effort to sing them. Of course, none of us can sing like her, but that doesn't mean that the effort that is required to be able to achieve a certain level of proficiency in being able to sing them should not be there. And I believe that at least us as youngsters who want to take the art form forward should see that a very important aesthetic component of this art form that is very unique to Carnatic music are padams and javalis, and the ragas and the music that exists within them. So I think it's very important for us to, I think, understand that, value it, and then I think work on it as well. When we also look at a couple of javalis that she's sung, my favorite out of all of the ones that she's sung is Nee Maatale Mayanura in Purvi Kalyani. There's a very different quality of the Purvi Kalyani in that particular javali, and the poise that she maintains throughout that javali in terms of all the movements that it has, and the Kala Pramanam is very unique, because most of the other javalis she sings is at a slightly faster pace. If you take Smarasundaranguni, it is also slower in speed but still a bit faster than Nee Maatale. It's almost like the Nee Maatale has a meditative quality to it. And every time I listen to it, I just like to zone out and just be part of that sonic experience.
సేవలే ఏమేమో బోధించిననే మారజే సేవలే ఈ మాటలే మాయంత మాటలే మాయంత చక్కని సామివలే చెక్కిలి నొక్కిరవ చక్కని సామివలే చెక్కిలి నొక్కిరవ చక్కని సామివలే చెక్కిలి నొక్కిరవ గోలించిన చక్కని సామివలే మొక్కిరవ ముక్కెరనికి కెరని గోలించిన నీ మాటలే మాయముర.
One other javali that I'd like to also mention here is Muttavadura. It's again a very short javali in Saveri, and there is one particular Sangati in the Pallavi that she keeps coming back to. In fact, even the beginning, the Mutta, the Sa, the way she hits the Sa, the modulation of the Mutta, the Mu is slightly softer in the curve, but then the moment the Ta as a syllable appears, the Sa becomes slightly bolder. We can go on speaking about the nuance of each and every portion of every single one of these syllables, but we are not going to do that now because of paucity of time. But there is one particular Sangati that she sings across every single time that sounds exactly the same and has the same modulations, intensity and the same grandeur every single time. And throughout that particular javali in Saveri as well, the way the knee is handled again traditionally is very similar to the Sri Rajagopala Nishada that we already spoke about when we spoke of compositions and how there's a certain amount of historicity to it. So that is carried forward in many of the padams and javalis and the phrases that they retained as well. It's unfortunate that today many of these phrases are being whitewashed, changed, polished for so many different reasons because it doesn't fit our current understanding of Arona, Avarohana within Carnatic music. But in my opinion, there can't be a worse disservice for us to do to these compositions that have had such wonderful character retained so preciously by all of these great artists. So we'll finish by listening to this, we'll finish this segment by listening to this portion of Muttavadura by Brinda.
ముట్టవదురా మోగనాంగనన్నిపుడు ముట్టవదురా మోగనాంగనన్నిపుడు ముట్టవదురా మోగనాంగనన్నిపుడు ముట్టవదురా మోగనాంగనన్నిపుడు
Before we move on to the final section, that is Viritam. Just wanted to we wanted to speak about her personality and how she was as a person. I have never seen Brindama, and I only heard so much about her and her personality. And the one thing that everybody that I've interacted with about her say is that she has an extremely strong personality. And the one thing that comes across to most people is the certain pride that she has about her lineage in music and her patantara, and the kind of confidence and conviction in her music and in the Carnatic music that she has learnt, that she has, which to many people would seem as very strong as a reaction, when interacting with her. But I don't know, because I haven't interacted with her or seen her in person at all. It's just the sheer confidence and pride of her lineage that I think comes across as, quote unquote arrogance or whatever it is.
Okay. So, a lot of people who've interacted with her, who've written about their experiences with her, or who've shared with some of us just what it means to be in her presence, have said that she's a very intimidating woman. Have also said that at times she can have a sharp tongue. One thing for us to remember is that she is from a different time period where strong, independent women were not often allowed to be who they are. And especially in a traditional setting like Carnatic music, for her to be from a family of a marginalized background, to be able to perform on stage and to have all of her peers who are male musicians predominantly respect, revere her, and sometimes even fear her, is, I think, speaks values of what her music meant to even the people who listen to her. Because this would happen only if there was something in her music that everyone saw, valued, were afraid of, and knew they couldn't do. And what I also believe people took as a sharp tongue is, I think, from maybe a place of their own inadequacy, rather than actually acknowledging, okay, this is what it is. This is a person who values music over every individual, any other emotion. So everything she said probably stemmed from that. Of course, every artist is eccentric. We all have our own individual idiosyncrasies and character about who we are and stuff. But then the one thing that every person who's interacted with her has said is that her commitment and her dedication to the art form of what she believed was music to her far surpassed everything else that would matter to us as human beings. And I think that value to the art, that commitment to what it means to be a musician, is extremely important for each of us to learn from, because at the end of the day, irrespective of what we choose to do professionally, what is feeding that is the art. So being true and honest and approaching that particular art form with utmost integrity is of great importance. And if that intimidates the people around you, that's for, I guess, the others to figure out. But the fact that she held on to that so gracefully, but with great power, tells us the kind of woman that she was. And it's also very important to know that for somebody like her, who comes from a family with such great importance to lineage, the fact that she held on to that so lightly, she carried that so lightly, adding her own stamp to everything that she's learned over a period of time, and then generously passing that on to the next generation the way she thought it should be passed on, is, I think, a great indicator to what an artist should be and how they should value their art. So having said that, the next portion that I think we were going to get into is her Viritam singing. And anybody who's heard her renditions of, I think, Kalyano, La Sasima or any of those Viritams, at the end of it, you don't feel like you want to do anything else. You want to switch off, just take it in and do something else. So having said that, for her being an artist who also didn't like music being spoken about too much, we've already spoken way more than what we had planned to. So I think we are just going to play this Viritam, finish with that, and let you take in the music just like how we did as well. And as always, it's been great fun for both of us to
yeah.
put this episode together for MOPA Foundation, and we hope to see you in the next, but can't wait until we can hear the same Vritam we've probably heard
So many
hundreds
times
of
together,
times,
yeah.
but still eager to hear. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
ಭವ ಗಗನಗತಿ ಕ್ಲಾಂತಿ ಹರಿ ಪ್ರಣಾಮ ದಿಕ್ಕು ಪ್ರಖ್ಯಾತ ಭವ ಗಗನಗತಿ ಕ್ಲಾಂತಿ ಹರಿ ಪ್ರಣಾಮ ದಿಕ್ಕು ಪ್ರಖ್ಯಾತ ಭೂಮಾ ವಿವಿಧದ ದಿನುತ ದೇವತಾ ರಾಮನಾಮ ದೇವತಾ ರಾಮ